Hello and welcome. Thank you for joining us for Docs in Progress's Community Stories Festival. I'm Chris Higgins. I'm the board chair, and I'm also an alum of the AU film program. So I'm excited to introduce this Q&A for you. I hope you had a chance to watch these fantastic films. This is my cat. She always has to make a cameo. So I'm going to hand it over now because you didn't come to hear me speak. So I'm going to hand it over now to our wonderful artistic director, Adele Schmidt.
Hi. Hello, everybody. Thank you, Chris. Yes, this is the Docs in Progress Community Stories Film Festival. We are in our 13th year, and I have the pleasure today to moderate this session coming from American University Community Voice Lab. These films come from that particular lab. These are fantastic films, and as you all know, you can still watch them. They are streaming online on Eventive until March 15. So our festival is hybrid. Yesterday we had an in-person screening, and now we are moving on with Q&As today and tomorrow, and the films will be available until March 15. I'm very happy to be here today because American University is also a place where I am very often, because I'm also a adjunct professor for film and video production at the School of Communication there at American University. Fantastic program. And the output of students who do fantastic work is just amazing. And so I will go forward and introduce our filmmakers. So we have here on the call Phil and Amin. They come in with the film East of the River, beautiful movie. And then we have Heather. There is another film in the program. You can still watch it. It's from Lawrence Green. Lawrence is actually filming today, so we wanted to come in, but obviously when we are busy, we can't do it. But I'm going to read a little part of his director statement he sent us later on, so we can include him at least virtually a little bit. So here we are with our filmmakers, and I think before we go into the films and the questions, I would like to read the bios of each of you because we have impressive people here. Let me just start with Philip. Philip is a second-year MFA candidate in Film and Media Arts at American University. He has always been interested in sharing stories that challenge how we think about marginalized communities and socially oppressed cultures. In the past, Phil's work has highlighted Haiti's rising infant mortality rate and the growing problem of gentrification in the city of Miami. As a filmmaker, he hopes his work not just evokes empathy, but becomes a catalyst to inspire change in our communities by bridging the understanding, the differences which make us unique. Great to have you here today, Phil, my former teaching assistant as well. Fantastic person. Amin El-Sivi is an Egyptian filmmaker based in Washington, D.C. He has a master's degree in film and media production from American University in Washington, D.C. Currently, he works as a multimedia producer for the World Bank Group in the communications department with a focus on Middle East and North Africa. In 2015, he moved from Egypt to Washington, D.C. to work as a producer for the Middle East Broadcasting Networks. In 2019, he won the People's Voice Webby Award for a short documentary titled Rukiji. And if I pronounce it wrong, you tell me, Amin. Between 2013 and 2015, he worked as an assistant producer and assistant director in independent feature films and documentaries in Egypt. Welcome, Amin. Great to have you here. And then we have Heather. Heather Brumley is a producer and director in her final year of MFA in Film and Media Arts at American University in Washington, D.C. Prior to attending an American, she received her Master in Film, Peace and Conflict from Trinity College Dublin and worked with Wave Trauma Center in Belfast, Northern Ireland. As a filmmaker, Heather seeks to combine her passion for social justice and her love for storytelling. Welcome, filmmakers. So let's start with you. Let's talk about your films. Maybe, Phil, you want to start with your motivation to do East of the River? Hello?
So muted. It's not muted anymore. Well, this was a collaboration between the AU Community Voice Lab and also the Humanities Truck at in the Humanities Truck Fellowship in Washington D.C. So we were trying to do a story on climate change, but then when we found out the story of Kelvin, then we thought we couldn't tell any other stories unless we told his story first, because the story of the um, the landfill and the burning and and all the environmental injustice that was happening to the people in that community had to be told before you can tell any story about climate change. I think that was the catalyst of the problems that we have right now. It's that burning and the dumping that polluted the Anacostia River. So we wanted to tell his story because when we were doing research, people didn't even know uh, about his name. People didn't know that he died in this fire, and people didn't know the reason the burning stopped was because of his death. So we felt we felt called, basically, or felt mandated to tell his story.
Yeah, to remind our audience about the film, it is a boy. He was, I think, 7 years old, and he that happened all back then in 1968 when he was. And we're going to come to that too, to that particular story on looking for food and looking for things there. He died because of fire there in 68, and then after that they closed or they covered it. That's another story. So that's just to remind the audiences what the film is about and the backstory a little bit. I mean, you are also part of the film. I understand you are the cinematographer, producer. Talk a little bit about your role.
My role was a co-director and cinematographer on the project. And as Phil said, we were both really, really motivated ever since we heard about Kelvin's story, because I've been living in DC for about 8 years, and I've been to that park many times. I've never imagined that that beautiful place used to be a dump. And what made me more motivated, but also a little upset, is that that history is not being taught. You know, when you visit the park, you cannot find like a plaque or any memorial, especially for Kelvin, for that sacrifice that he gave and helped shape the future of this whole area. So yeah, my role basically was just Phil and I collaborating on the project. We spent about 7 months working on it from day one. I think sometime in October 2021 all the way to May of 2022. You know, we met like a couple days a week to research, brainstorm, do field visits together. Yeah, this is mostly it.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Yeah, we're going to talk about cinematography because the film stands especially out because of the beautiful cinematography. And there is, of course, a plan behind that. Heather, yes, your motivation to do the film, Food for All.
So this was a very short film done in conjunction with Martha's Table. Martha's Table being a nonprofit here in Washington, D.C. that helps primarily focuses on people in Ward 7 and 8, dealing with a lot of different social issues, but a lot of what the film focuses on is primarily food insecurity and just the food desert issues that, lack of access to fresh produce, fresh and healthy produce. We had so I work through with the Community Voice Lab, and in part of that we had a film done by another filmmaker who was part of the community documentary course, which I help I'm an ITA for at American University. And so this was actually a second film kind of with Martha's Table, kind of to start a series for them in a way. So this was kind of a part 2. Which, Empire Strikes Back, always the best. So, so it was.
Thank you so much. Can you, for our audience, explain to us what exactly is the American Community Voice Lab?
Absolutely, I'm so glad you asked. The Community Voice Lab at American University is a film lab that is directed by Professor Laura Waters Hinson and is basically a model of filmmaking that seeks to be collaborative and in some capacities co-creation, but working primarily here in the DC area. With a lot of times we work with nonprofits or just local storytellers to tell stories in a non-extractive method. So, and most of the films that we do, a lot of them come out of the community documentary course, which Amin and Phil were both in that course, and their film was part of that course as well. And so we have currently 10 students who are going through that process again and should have another 10 films by the end of this semester, with all featuring local storytellers and people involved with local nonprofits.
That's perfect. The output is just amazing. And these stories are so important, and they go out into the world and people can see, and we know about local stories. And that is what Docs in Progress Community Film Festival is all about. Local filmmakers talk about local stories because we have a very rich community about these local stories. Now, let's talk about access. It's always a challenge for us filmmakers sometimes to access our stories, get access to interviewees, to people, to talk to us. And sometimes we have topics that are difficult to talk about. Phil, can you talk a little bit about your access? You said you decided to do the story. You started the research. You looked for these people. You found people who were living back then, smelling the fire, remembering that moment. Can you talk about that a little bit? How did you get to this?
Access was at first a little bit challenging because it was just, we knew one person. We knew Dennis Chestnut, the main speaker in the film. But it was at first it was a little bit hard. It was like Dennis Chestnut knew somebody and he knew someone else, and we kept on trying to find people that knew who were living there during the time. Also Trey Shepard, the river keeper, he gave us like basically a personal tour of the rivers. That's why we were able to get those river shots. And he was the one who actually told us about the story of Kelvin Mock. It was just basically listening to people in the community to get the access of these stories. Like someone knew someone who knew someone. So that was basically, like Heather said, community storytelling is getting involved in the community, placing yourself there, listening to people, and see who can connect you to the right person, and see if they want to share their stories. And most people did want to share their stories. Most people wanted to tell what was going on during the time. I think with access to cameras and access to video making, it's so tangible now that we're able to tell these stories. We're able to tell them faster. We're able to get them out. We're able to tell them in an appealing way, in an emotional way, to get people to to want to see and want to hear.
Yeah, that's fantastic. That's how it works with us documentary filmmakers. We then start researching, and then another that lead you, and you just immerse yourself into the story, and that is how it works. I mean, you are the cinematographer. You were with. I mean, when did you start filming? Because I guess Phil got access first, and then at one point you came with your camera. Talk a little bit about it, because it's of course a difficult story to tell. When did you join this? When did you start filming?
We started filming in January of 2021. 2022, MLK Day, Martin Luther King Day. The Anacostia River Keeper organized a cleanup day at Pope Branch Park. So it's a park where there's a creek in the middle that ends up in Anacostia River, and people are cleaning the park so they keep the river clean, because the dumping that happened at that park, the trash ends up in the creek, then the river. So yeah, we were interviewing people who were cleaning the park, and we started filming in January, and our first interview was with Trey, who is the river keeper and the person who told us the story about Kelvin.
That's a good start. So you could start with that activity, and then you dived into more and more. Yeah, talking about access, Heather, did you have any difficulties accessing your main interviewee?
Erica Lonesome. Yeah.
Yes.
No, we did. Well, I'll say this. We started with Martha's Table, and really part of sometimes what we do with our partnerships is ask if they have a storyteller who would like to be able to tell the story. The most complicating issue was primarily just dates and timing, because we were wanting to film some of the food markets and therefore had to schedule around when people were available that were also available when the markets were happening for the schools. So that became a little tricky. And because of that, basically the scheduling process, Erica volunteered herself, or probably more reluctantly volunteered to be a part of the process, kindly agreed is probably the best way to put it. And then was able to tell us about, the process and a little bit of her own passion for wanting to help with food insecurity.
Yeah. Yeah. Talking about food insecurity, that's the next topic. I have it here on my list. People from outside might think that Washington, D.C. is a rich city. It is a capital of this country. But then you realize now that there are Ward 7 and 8, and there's a lack of grocery stores. There are food deserts. Can you talk about this? What is happening? Because there are other areas where you have much more grocery stores and for much less people. So what is happening here in Washington, D.C.?
Well, first of all, I should say that I am not an expert in this area. There are people that have studied this. They have all of the statistics memorized. I come into this very much as a storyteller. So, but from my understanding from the research that, we have done, and basically from a lot of what Martha's Table has shared with us, it does come from a systemic and social structure, basically around allotment of wealth in DC. Historically, there have been certain wards. The Washington, DC area is divided up, for those who don't know, into different wards. And some of those wards were historically kind of marginalized and neglected. So we talk about the leafy Northwest, where AU is actually, and there's a lot of grocery stores and a lot more wealth, right? And a lot of that has to do with racial lines as well. Historically, Ward 7 and 8 were primarily put off for people of color and minority populations, and were therefore kind of neglected in a lot of the resources that were put to and investment that was made. I mean, that's where the dump was, right? And Amin and Phil, hearing about their research too, they talked about how people used to go through the dump to get things that they might need. So there's just a historic lack of investment in certain wards. And that kind of has reaped this food desert situation, which we still deal with today.
Yeah, and we can pick up right there, Philip, the boy, that it had to do with also food access, because back then in 1768, people were going to the landfill to look for food and other things. Give us a little bit kind of a visual of what happens there, and how does it look today? How is that park today? And the other questions, these three questions. No, I do the last question, the third question after that. Just talk about that. What happened in 68 when people, what did they do? What did they do there?
What happened when
in the landfill? They went there because they were looking for food or for other things, right? Can you describe a little bit the visual here?
Yes. So all the city's waste came to that landfill. So if the city didn't want it anymore, it went there. So all the old food, all the old toys, all the old bread, all the old ice cream, furniture. We have a story from Mr. Chestnut that didn't make the cut of him talking about they knew when they would there was an ice cream parlor in the city, and they knew when they would dump all the expired ice cream, and him and his friends would like take some spoons from their mother's cupboard, and they would have themselves an ice cream party, just eating all the ice cream, because they knew that it would be dumped there every week. Furniture, if you needed discarded wood, those were there. People would take these things and kind of reuse them or recycle them and make them their own, because everything else was just so far away, other side of Washington D.C. So it was easy access for these people. It was in fact a good thing for some, because there was no other way to get these materials that they needed.
Yeah, and the death of the boy was kind of a trigger to start covering it up somehow, right? And they started doing that. So today, the park, can you describe how the park is, and where are we with that initiative to do a memorial for the boy? Is there still an initiative, or?
Well, they covered. Well, you got to think about what's been going on all those years that they've been burning there, and when you think about all the old plastic, the PCPs that they've been burning there have been leaching into the river all this time, which has been polluting the river all this time, polluting the soil all this time. So they just thought that if we just cap it, that will solve everything. That's not how the environment works. You can't just cap it and walk away from it. They're still working on the river. There's like they're talking about drugging the bottom of the river to get rid of all the contamination out. There was we have film of them putting fresh oysters into the river, because oysters will eat up all the contaminants in the river. So they're trying to make the river cleaner and make that area cleaner. I think they're trying to do that because the Anacostia area and the Navy Yard area is kind of popping right now, and it's getting lots of attraction. So I think investors see dollar signs in that area, and they're trying to make it better. But as for them putting a memorial for Calvin, I think Dennis Chestnut talks about it, but I don't know if there's anything in the works for it.
One thing I can add is last year in October, the National Park Service and the city both reached out to the residents of Ward 7 and for community input to see how can they launched a project called Revitalization Project. And some residents asked for a memorial for Kelvin. So we are sure that the residents asked for it, but they are working on it right now. So we're still waiting to see if this is going to happen or not.
Yeah, and I think your film can help to make the cause here, because it's a beautiful film, and I do think that films can help to to promote a cause and give. I would suggest using it as a tool to make that happen, a memorial for the boy. Yeah, let's talk about a little bit the stylistic approach about these films, because they are very different. Heather, your film is very well shot, beautiful. It's kind of more cinema verite. Can you talk about this? How did you decide to do it this way?
Yeah, so the my DP for the film is actually JP Batista, and he's actually I was teasingly talking about that film earlier. He was the first filmmaker to do with Martha's Table and did a film called Food for Thought, and he's actually very good. It's a very good film. I do recommend it. But he was my DP. So basically, whenever I'm working with a DP, because I was in the role as a director, I'll come up with my shot list ahead of time and kind of go through. I really wanted to have more of the experience for the viewer to kind of be present with Erica as she walks through her day, kind of, lives her life in this experience, which, is always a bit challenging because asking people to let a camera follow you is, can feel weird at times and difficult to some people have a greater or lesser level of comfort with the camera. So, but basically trying to do it in a non-invasive way. We filmed a whole packing sequence with their volunteers. We filmed their schools. One of my favorite parts was actually filming some of the families that were there that came to receive and getting to see and I have so much that we didn't get to use, unfortunately, just because of kind of our parameters for our deliverables. But there was a couple of families that I interviewed that were just delightful and amazing and really smart. One woman who I spoke to with her 2 young kids and has her doctorate and probably could have given me a whole seminar on not only the intersection of food insecurity, but also nutrition in general. And so there was some lovely parts of that, but very much just wanting to be and follow and kind of have more of that realistic, playing with some speed of camera and stuff like that.
Yeah, it feels very nice. It's very very visual and very colorful and very close. You see how how close you came to the whole situations, no? And that makes this short film, it's about 5 minutes only, very attractive. So I encourage all of our viewers to really watch the American University Community Voice Lab films, because they are fantastic. Now let's talk about the cinematography about East of the River, because here you have a treat. It is a beautiful film. I mean, yeah, I mean, you shot this. Part of the film is in black and white. You of course, I guess you did that in post production, and then you have color footage. Talk about why did you make that choice? Both, yeah. I mean, maybe you want to start with that.
So our main challenge in the project that Phil and I faced is a lack of footage because it was in the 1960s, right? And so we only found two photos of the dump, and we found a lot of articles. There's one that we used in the film from the Evening Star. So the black and white. So we had to basically recreate the scenes. So for example, there's a shot of a doll in the surrounded by trash. So we had to. This is kind of scripted in a way to match what our character is saying. Mrs. Jerry Green, when she said her aunt used to stop by the dump before visiting her to check if there's something that she can get for her or her siblings. So basically recreating some of the scenes and trying to visualize how this world looked like at the time. And also it was filmed of course in colors, and we had to add the black and white effect in the post. So you also see the difference between how the park looks like now, which is very beautiful, and green and nice, but also that past, I think we had an artistic decision to make it in black and white.
I think it works very, very well, and that is what we have at our hands. I think tools as documentary filmmakers, we can use these images and what you just explained, that doll who is in the dump you filmed right now, and then when one of the persons is saying, they were looking for dolls, they were looking for food, that is a perfect match. We as an audience can then imagine how it was back then, because that is what we also always face, documentary filmmakers. We don't have the footage. We don't have it. So let's kind of recreate it without lying to the audience. It's obviously filmed today, but you can imagine now. You see that doll and you imagine, that's how it looked like back then in '68. Very beautiful. Yes. So there is another film in this section, Trashman. Before I read that little part of the director's statement of Lawrence, can you talk to us a little bit about what you are working on now, maybe on your next project? Or let's first maybe talk about what did you learn from the project, from each of your films. Heather, you want to start? What did you learn after?
Sure, absolutely. Well, I think you learn every time you make a film. Probably in this film was done on a very short time frame, so having to work quickly in a lot of ways and do a lot of problem solving there. I think I learned a lot about Martha's Table as an organization, about the different work that they do, and learned a lot about the community in the different in Ward 7 and 8. Particularly. And so it's always a real honor, in my opinion, anytime someone agrees to share their story with you. So I always value that and treasure that a lot.
Perfect. Phil, what took you away from that whole experience?
First, I want to go back to access again. When we talked about access, I want to say it was Heather who brought this fellowship to my attention before that made me want to apply to it, and that put us together. And also Lawrence, when we were talking about we need another voice, he said, "Oh, my mom lived in that area during the time. You should interview my mom." So that's how Miss Green got into the film. It was just like the access that we all had together what kind of brought us together. We all have stories about Ward 7 and 8, and we were allowed to use the access that we had to make these beautiful films about these communities. So it was great that it's all like full circle here. What I've learned is how much research goes into making a film. There's lots of research that has to go into a documentary film, just so you just want to get it right. You want to get your facts right. You don't want to say anything that's misleading or wrong, because once you put it out there, it's out there, and you want to make sure that it's right. So I've learned a lot of research, and yeah, so I didn't know how much research went into it, but it was a lot.
Amin, what did you take away?
I think so. As I said earlier, I come from Egypt, so I'm not new because I've been here for 8 years, but I also still feel like I'm new to DC. So I was really happy with my experience in that film because it got me to know a lot about DC's history, since we spent about 5 months researching and doing a lot of field trips. So it got I think getting to know the city you live in is really important, and made me more curious to like dig deeper and learn more about the city. And yeah.
That's perfect. Yeah, and I think I'm looking at our clock here. The time is limited. Let's do one more question to wrap this up. What do you have in your pocket for the next film, Heather?
Well, I have two things currently going on. One, I'm going to mention Amin, who is currently helping me finish editing a project right now on 3 women bicycle mechanics here locally in the DC area. And that was a really fun film. I shot that last spring and have just been still just trying to get the editing finished up on that. And then I'm also in pre-production for a film that I will be filming this summer in Northern Ireland, which is where I was prior to moving to DC and coming to American. And I will be working with 2 women there who are survivors and victims of the Troubles that happened in Northern Ireland, and who were both injured as a result of violence there. And a story about their work to achieve and get a government pension for all victims and survivors in Northern Ireland who were injured as a result of the Troubles.
Wow, fantastic, incredible project. Phil, next project?
Oh, next project. Whoa. We've been talking about expanding this story. There's so many stories in that area, so many stories on top of stories that we feel need to be told. So the hardest thing is finding the story that that's very compelling. I mean, you can tell a story, but you want to tell a powerful story. You want to tell a compelling story. You want to tell a story that moves people to emotionally want to change or to give some type of empathy. So I'm looking for that story. I'm looking for that story to tell.
The one thing is also, we as filmmakers, there's always something in the thinking process. Even if you're not, you just did one and you're already thinking in the next film, and that is the start of everything, the idea. Perfect. I mean, something you're working on?
I think 2 things. I think Phil and I have the feel that we're going to do something together soon. So we're just taking a short break, and then I think we will resume like researching and see how we're going to collaborate one more time. And another project I'm working on is with Task, a nonprofit in DC that works with torture survivors. So I'm working with them on a short documentary. We're still in the pre-production phase, but hopefully towards the end of the year, we will have the final product.
Thank you so much. So we're coming to an end here. I wanted to thank you, Heather, Amin, and Phil, to be here today. I wanted to thank our audience. Is there any question from the audience? Mariam, our technical director. If not, before I hand it over back to Chris, I just read the statement, part of the statement of Lawrence Green, who couldn't make it today. His film is Trashman. Watch this film. This is a fantastic film. I love Trashman. So he says,
I'm a big fan of it too. Lawrence did a great film. I love it.
I mean, I was amazed also by that film. So audience, please watch that film. Trashman was my first self-participatory, environmentally focused film. I shot Trashman mostly surrounded by tons of trash in the streets and in the woods of my community. It was an emotional experience that pushed my physical boundaries. My goal was to produce a multi-layered film that would provide another set of questions and answers with each scene. Trash pollution is a complicated issue, and I wanted to showcase how the blame is widespread. Trashman shows the result of a large population living closely together and how communities solve and not solve complex issues. Lawrence, you are with us. I know you're working hard on some production, so we send you a lot of wishes and good vibes. I think with this, I can hand it over to Chris. Thank you so much for coming, filmmakers. And Chris makes the last final notes here.
Thank you, Adele. Thank you again, Heather, Amin, and Phil. And as so much of what has been discussed here is about community. You know, I loved the comments that were said about access and how important it is for people to tell their own stories. That's what this festival is all about, and it takes a community to put on this festival, and it takes a community of sponsors as well. So we want to thank our sponsors for making this possible. As you may have noticed, the festival is free to the public, and we want to be able to continue to keep as much of our programming accessible to as many people as we possibly can. With that in mind, I wouldn't be doing my job as the board chair without asking for your support as well. So if you would be inclined to help us continue with our programming, please make a donation at whatever level is comfortable for you. I'm also going to encourage you to check out the rest of our programming. Docs in Progress, you know, we are of the filmmakers, by the filmmakers, and for the filmmakers. We've got screenings, we've got workshops, we've got programming for young artists, fellowships for emerging and professional filmmakers. Check out everything we've got at docsinprogress.org/events for everything that's upcoming. Thank you for joining us. And please check out the rest of the programs. We've got another one this afternoon, and I believe 3 more tomorrow. So have a good evening.